Hi, I'm Adam McCabe, former sergeant in the United States Marine Corps and a co-founder of Purple Star Veterans and Families. Today's date is May 10th, 2013, and we are here at GrassRoots Community Television Studio in Aspen, Colorado. I want to thank Rai Zupankis and Jackie Schaefer. They're going to be helping us with their skill and support in putting on the program today. We are working for and with the Roaring Fork Veterans History Project in association with Aspen Historical Society and the Library of Congress. Today we'll be interviewing Dr. Gerald D. Alpern, born August 2nd, 1932. Dr. Alpern is a clinical psychologist, a Korean War veteran, and a former professor at Indiana University Medical School. Doctor, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
I'm pleased to be here, Adam.
Great. So, Doc, let's start from the beginning. Can you tell me what branch of service you were in?
Yes, I was in the U.S. Army. Started off the basic training, basic infantry training. For advanced training, because of my background in education, I went into the Medical Corps and then went to Fort Sam Houston in Texas, and ended up at Valley Forge Army Hospital, Phoenixville, Pennsylvania.
Right. And what rank were you while you served?
Oh, I got way up there. I started as a PFC and went all the way to what would be the equivalent of a corporal,
Sure.
But it was called Specialist Fourth Class, and that's because I specialized in psychiatric services.
Excellent, excellent. Doc, how old were you when you joined the service?
Well, let's see, I just finished college in '54. I volunteered for the draft.
Wow.
So I was 22 at that time. I had just finished college, and in my days there was a draft going on. It wasn't the volunteer army that you have now. So I volunteered to go in as quickly as possible because I could get out to do my graduate work.
I see.
So it was right after college.
So tell me a little bit. I've done some reading, I've seen some movies, but you know, I obviously wasn't there in the 1950s. Can you give me a little bit of background of what was going on culturally, what was going on in America at that time?
It was a hell of a time. When we ended the war in '49, we defeated the Germans, the Japs, the Italians, and suddenly we had a new enemy, Russia. And the Cold War started in 1950, and that frightened a lot of people. At first, we felt pretty good because we had the atomic bomb. We were the only ones who had the atomic bomb. And then the Russians got the atomic bomb. That caused a scare. We hustled around a little. We developed the hydrogen bomb, 1,000, 10,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb. 9 months later, the Russians got it. We were in war. Russia became the enemy. They started taking over all of Europe. They took over Hungary. They took over Czechoslovakia. China became communist China. We had a little bit of Berlin. They surrounded Berlin. The Cold War was frightening. People were building bomb shelters, some idiotic things. School children were learning to get under their desks in case of an atomic attack. I mean, a lot of things that didn't make sense. But the 50s were dominated by fears of what were going on, and a lot of things didn't help it. I mean, I really could go on about that and talk about McCarthyism, which struck fear in the hearts of Americans beyond belief. In 1950, he held up a piece of paper, blank, of course, but we didn't know that. 81 people in the State Department are communists. He started there, and a fear-mongering did frighten people. He talked at the 1952 Republican Convention as a fighting Marine. He never saw any combat. And, you know, the Republicans were trying to get reelected after 20 years of Democratic things, so they used that fear-mongering to be able to frighten the people and get some Republicans elected. And then McCarthy took off Like, I mean, he accused the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts. George Marshall was accused, the Secretary of the Army of War. He brought him to tears. He had hearings that went from 54 to 56, just the time I was in the service. Oh no, I think they finished about 54 or 55.
And that's when you joined the service, was 54?
Yes, right in that time when everyone was so afraid that there were communists everywhere in our government, and people were afraid to fight him back. I mean, it's a long story, Ed.
Sounds like times were, it was quite unsettling around the U.S. What were some of your experiences prior to going to the service? You were in college at this time. What was your major? What were you studying? What were you trying to accomplish?
I was studying psychology.
Okay.
And more than studying psychology, and this is how I got my Army profession, because I was working half-time in a psychiatric hospital. But that hospital was a teaching hospital for the University of Pittsburgh. We were at the top of what was going on. We cared about the patients. They brought from all the state hospitals examples of manic depressives, what you now call bipolar,
Sure.
Catatonics, schizophrenics, paranoids. But I knew what they were, and we were taught about them, and we were taught how to treat patients very humanely. It was a teaching hospital, and I did that half-time, paid for part of my schooling while I was getting my undergraduate work. But I gained experiences at that hospital. I mean, I knew the patients, we were in on the staffings. It was a great experience.
So coming out of that, having been in college, having had some experience in treating psychology and psychiatry, you join the service and thinking, you know, if I join up voluntarily, my term in the service will be a little shorter and I can get out and work on my graduates. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. I could have gone in for 3 years as an officer or applied for officers training school, but that's a 3-year commitment. I wanted to get on with my profession and go to graduate school. So I volunteered so I could go in early summer 1954 so I could attend graduate school in 56. That's just what I did.
So going in voluntarily, were you able to pick your branch of service?
No. It was the idea of volunteering, you know, about half the soldiers, the draft was still going on. They had stopped the draft about 48, 49. 50, they knew that they were going to require people. So the draft was reinstated. If you were in college, you could get a college deferment. That is, they put you on side until you then you knew you were going to get drafted. So volunteering for the draft was not a patriotic, wonderful thing on my part, like it was on your part. I volunteered because that was the easiest way to go in, and I volunteered and they put me in the Army, and then for good reasons. You know, they knew what you did as a civilian, and they put me immediately in the medical corps, and eventually I was a neuropsychiatric technician.
So that was your actual MOS or military occupation school, was that?
Yes, although I could have, after military, gone overseas and practiced overseas. There were a lot of things going on overseas, but my orders were flagged. I wasn't allowed to go overseas. Again, relating to the McCarthy thing that I talked about before.
Let's step back just a little bit. So you make a conscious decision and say, you know what, I'm going to volunteer my services to the military in hopes of getting out a little early and being able to go into your overall plan of going to graduate school a little earlier. But you'd been to college, you'd had some life experiences. You know, it sounds to me like you were a little bit of a free thinker. What was it like going from college to boot camp?
Well, you know, I wasn't naive. I knew what boot camp was going to be like, and it was not terrible. I mean, we went to Fort Knox, Kentucky. We marched a lot. We were on firing ranges. You know, some things were a little strange. I found out that GI meant government issue, and you belonged to the Army, and anybody who had one more stripe on their arm than you had to answer to. They told us how many pieces of toilet paper we could use when we would go to the bathroom. You know, I mean, some of it, and there's the right way to do things, the wrong way to do things, and the Army way.
Yeah.
And here we're going to do things in the Army way. So you'd watch them do things, you know, clean up a mess hall, and there's a logical way to do it, but no, you didn't do it the logical way. You did it the Army way. They were frightening things. You know, they had to let us know what poison gas was like.
Sure.
We had to run through fields where that odor was coming up. We had gas masks on. We had to sniff it so we could identify it. Then we went in through tear gas where we took off the mask and had to say, Private Alpern, Sarah, US 523183333. And you had to say that without tearing and move on. I remember marches, you know, to the point of fatigue. I think the only time I ever really hallucinated was on marches, on no sleep. I was a squad leader, and I was at the head of a thing, and I thought I saw the hand of God come down, or chasms open up in front of me. I mean, they fatigued you, but it wasn't anything horrendous, and I think it was reasonable training for what they were training us to do. That part of the Army made sense to me, training you to be a soldier.
Yep.
I remember covering a line of fire, and I wasn't allowed to point my rifle anywhere. If a sniper is up there shooting at me, I didn't have the option of doing that. That was somebody else's responsibility. Right. So, you know, there were learnings that were logical.
Right.
Although how many pieces of toilet paper I used.
And I understand, and that's been my experience as well. As there's a common frame, there's a method to the madness, and you know, through some of my dealings in the military, some of that did make sense. In the Marine Corps, we talked about instant obedience to orders. It may not make sense to what you know, but you've got to follow the direction anyways. And so it seemed to me like some of the time in the military we would get orders that didn't make sense right away, and some of the times they'd make sense later. And then there was those orders that just never really seemed to make sense.
No, and if you read books by people who really are examining what over in the service, especially the post 9/11, although I'm sure it's ever true for every war that ever took place, they're heartbreaking stories about stupid things that the Army did. And you and I are both in this Huts for Vets organization. Right. So because I didn't have the experiences you had, the actual experiences, I thought the thing that I should do is at least read about them.
Sure.
So a lot of returning veterans from Iraq, from Afghanistan, have written books about what it was like. I'd recommend it for everyone. I read them until I was in tears. I couldn't read them anymore. Mistakes that were made, positions that soldiers were put in, forced to do, and how I was very interested in how the personality develops from when you're in basic training, when you're idealistic and you're fighting for your country. Right. And then there's an evolution, and that disappears, and you become someone you don't recognize anymore.
And we'll talk a little bit more about that in detail. You know, walk me through what it's like. So you've gone through boot camp. You went through, I'm sure there was some schooling, although you had in-depth background in psychology already. Tell me again your MOS. The name of it was
Neuropsychiatric Technician. It meant that you ran the wards in the psychiatric hospital.
Okay.
You were helping the physicians, the doctors, the officers who were treating the patients. I would walk them from place to place, take care of them, their physical needs, help with the treatment. I eventually ended up as ward master in an insulin ward, and I'm sure we're going to get around to that.
So was that Valley Forge?
Yes, that was Valley Forge Army Hospital.
So you joined in 54. you know, the war was raging at that point?
No, war was over at that point.
War was over. So these are
returning vets that were coming from Korea, and the very sickest were hospitalized. They were supposed to be the lucky ones who were getting some treatment. They didn't know what the effects the war were having or how long lasting they were. So the people that I worked with were pretty sick and required institutionalization. It was blatant. It's not like Brian had described, or a lot of people have described, that were suffering from, you know, avoidance and anger and bad dreams and things that we know about now. These were people who could not function. They had been so stressed out. They were, they needed to be taken care of.
And so what's it like for you, PFC or E2 or E3 at this point, walking into Valley Forge, and there's this level of mental health care that needs to be provided to these veterans?
Well, right from the beginning, I knew I wasn't at a teaching hospital. The whole philosophy was different. We treated at the university hospital these guys very humanely. If they became upset, if they became rowdy and had to be, we would very gently, two guys would take them down as easily as possible. We would wrap them in sheets, ice sheets. We didn't have a lot of good sedative medications in the early 50s when I was at the hospital, but we would wrap them in these ice sheets, which serves as a sedative. The sheets warm up because of your body temperature, and it's a relaxing thing. Contrast that with, in the Army, we had what we called, get ready, knuckle therapy. I'm not going to describe it to you. I think you could guess what that was. And even the training, they were training other neuropsychiatric techs. The training I got was how to take these guys down gentle. If I would grab your left arm and one of my other buddies grabbed the right arm, that guy wasn't going anywhere. In the Army, I'd grab the left arm and the right arm would come around and hit me because they didn't have the training. And they were just, it was just, but that's really the tip of the iceberg. I was also very naive in terms of the treatment we were giving. Like, is this the point where I can describe insulin shock therapy?
Yes, please. Tell me about that.
Okay. Well, of course, I was an undergraduate. I didn't know. Let me tell you first what insulin shock therapy consists of. You take a man, you wake him up in the morning, and you load him up with insulin to the point that he goes into a coma and convulses for a long time, thrashing. We strap them down, you know, and then we would bring them out by force feeding them sugars, sundaes, sodas, and these guys. And the kind of a theory behind it was that they told us is it's like we're killing these guys and bringing them back to life. So they're going to like life again. They're going to trust people because we give them cinnamon bread. I mean, it was ludicrous. It seemed ludicrous, but the doctors were telling us this is what we're going to do. Now let me give you some facts about it.
Okay.
Insulin shock therapy was a legitimate therapy in 1927 when it was developed. Certainly by 1953, they knew it was useless. An article came out in Lancet, the most respected of the British medical journals, medical psychiatry journals. It was called The Myth of Insulin Treatment, where they said it was useless and inhuman. Now, I was doing it in 55, I was doing it in 56, and when I left in 56, they were still doing it. So I mean, that's kind of an example of how far behind standard practice in medicine was.
I just really have a hard time wrapping my head around this. These are veterans that have been to war, suffering from war trauma, and they're coming home, and this is the modality we're using to treat them. This is insulin shock therapy.
Yeah, and electric shock therapy, and then there was prefrontal lobotomies. You know, they wrote about it in One Flew Over the Cuckoo Nest.
Right.
Kesey, who wrote the book.
All under the philosophy that if we bring them close to death and bring them back, they'll be grateful to be alive.
something like that. I mean, I can't give you a good rationale because there ain't any, you know, but there were many signs of that. Let's go back a little earlier. A doctor, physician, who's working in the Army, he has a job. And his job is not the job he has as a civilian to take care of his patients.
Sure.
His job is to fulfill the mission that the Army has. So if you're on the front lines and you crumble and you can't do it anymore and you have let's call it a psychological wound, you know, what do? They give you whatever pill they can to get you back in the front. His duty is not to cure you or even help you. His duty is to get you back in the front lines. That's the mission that the doctors are. It's not like going to your doctor in a civilian life looking for help. And what they're doing now we're talking about the Korean War, but this is true today. What they're doing with the soldiers in Afghanistan and did in Iraq, you know, they give them things like antipsychotics, anti-seizure drugs, anything that they can give them. Pills are cheap.
Keep them in the fight.
Keep them in the fight. Keep them in the fight. You know, don't take them behind enemy lines. And they're doing this today. Let me give you one statistic that I found out. Antipsychotic drugs for active duty troops increased 183% from 2005 to 2011. That's how currently this is still going on. So you have to know that what doctors are doing in the Army for the active duty soldiers are getting them back into combat.
Right.
Now, I saw the other end of it. I saw them when they finally collapsed to the point where they brought them back. But there were many aspects of that. You know, when I was in the hospital run by the university,
Right.
I could tell you the diagnosis of each person: manic depressive, catatonic, hebephrenic, you know, whatever, some kind of anxiety disorder. You know what diagnosis I knew of in the Army? Oh, that's the old sergeant syndrome. Those are the guys we were laying out on the table. How medical does that sound? And here's one that's worse. We haven't talked about the people who were prisoners of war during the Korean War. Just thousands and thousands who were tortured, not waterboard torturing, but, you know, it's so hard to describe. Taking out eyes with burning things, cutting off limbs, trying to get them to get in front of a camera to say that communism is right and that they committed war crimes. And you know how they were diagnosed? The term that I learned when I was in the service then was they had give-up-itis. How's that for a medical term? Give-up-itis, or old sergeant syndrome. I mean, here's another very personal example. I can go back to my days in 1951, 52, when I was working at the university hospital. I knew the patients. I could tell you today the names of the people I worked with because they were human beings.
Right.
And I knew them, I helped them, played cards with them, that helped me with my homework. It was a human relationship. In preparation for talking to you today, I thought I'm going to try to remember some of the cases, specific cases. I can't remember one name, one real diagnosis. We just didn't treat them the way psychiatry was treating them in the civilian life. It was very different.
Tell me more about that. Tell me how you feel at that time. You've been through college. You've worked in a leading school in teaching updated tools and techniques in psychology. To go from that to, you know, seeing you use the word inhumane treatment, to seeing human beings being treated like a number. You know, quick field dressing, get them back in the fight. Tell me, emotionally.
Well, it was not fun. That's why I think I mentioned before, I didn't end up with a good conduct medal. Almost everybody gets in the service. You get nothing else, you get a good conduct medal. I didn't, because I fought the system. You know, not to the point, I mean, I had an honorable discharge and, you know, I did my job, but I was constantly you know, I don't want to aggrandize myself. Let's just say it was very hard to watch. I did what I could to get more humane treatment for these guys, because that's what I was taught, and I would teach it to my fellow, you know, people there who hadn't gone through the training. So I tried, but I don't want to aggrandize myself. I think probably I could have done more, probably I should have done more, but I was 22, 23. I was looking for getting out of the hospital and getting some R&R.
One of the questions I'd written down and I wanted to ask you was about, you know, supplies, and if you guys had all the things you needed. You know, me and my MOS in the infantry, that was always an issue. Do we have food? Do we have water? Do we have ammo? But it sounds like more so than supplies, it was training that was really lacking.
It was training that was lacking. We had food up the gazoo. I mean, when I started working up for a while, I worked the night shift, and you'd go into the kitchen and there were just vats of shrimp and whatever you wanted. I don't think we lacked for anything in terms of, but this was after the war, behind the lines, right near Philadelphia. We did not lack for anything but training or guidance. I was guiding the other soldiers of my same rank because I knew a little more, because I had had experience. And in that way, I was glad I was there. I was disappointed that I didn't get to go overseas. It would have been an adventure. The war was over, get stationed in Germany or some European, it would have been a wonderful experience for me, but the Army didn't like me for a couple of reasons, and it goes back to that McCarthy thing that I told you about.
Right, and it sounds like you put a voice behind some of those internal emotions of feeling like this isn't right, this isn't the right level of care. So a follow-up question that would be, you know, what was the dynamic between you and officers in your unit, you and your fellow enlisted men?
I had no relationship with the doctors. I didn't have a way to communicate with them at all. I only had the ability to communicate to guys that were at my level. So that's what I did. The officers were, you know, when I was in the hospital there, one of the psychiatrists, this was on a children's unit that I worked for a short time in the hospital, I met Benjamin Spock. He was not only a pediatrician, he was a child psychiatrist. And, you know, we got to be friends. He took me in his office, would look at things, would talk things over, why the treatment for the kids that he was recommending. I mean, nothing like that happened in the Army. There was a big division between the people who were officers and the enlisted men and the neuropsych technicians. The idea of including us in case reviews never came up. So.
Let's break it up just a little bit. Doc, here is a handsome young man in uniform here. How old were you in this picture? Can you recall?
Yeah, probably pretty early. So it was probably 1954. I was 22. You can't see without I had a patch on it. It doesn't show that, but you know, I started off as a private, became a PFC, and then after so many years of experience in the wards, they allowed me to be the specialist 4th class, but I was not going to go up. I was not the cooperative soldier, because I really would bring up things and try to go through.
So there's got to be a lot of stress, a lot of pressure, a lot of feelings of uneasiness and in your unit, both with your relationship with officers, with peers, with the level of training that's going on. You know, what is it that you did when you were able to find a little you time? What is it that you did on leave?
You know, I was a college graduate and a reader, and I was interested in everything that was going on in the world. I wasn't going to be able to influence what was going on in that hospital. I mean, what little influence I had some, but not. But what I could do is politically open up the eyes of my fellow soldiers. There was a book by Harvey Matusow. It came out in about '54, just when McCarthy died. This was a guy who lied in the Senate and said, oh yes, that guy was at a communist meeting with me, that guy was at a communist meeting with me, and they were ruining the careers of thousands of people. He was paid to testify. He had such pangs of conscience that he wrote a book. Now the government, this was after McCarthy had been condemned, but finally, at the end of '54, after doing so much damage to so many lives, he wanted to publish a book and let the public know what a sham those McCarthy hearings were. Well, the government put together a grand jury and demanded that the publisher, the 2B publisher, turn over all of their information, all the book drafts, all the verifying information to the grand jury. The publishers didn't do it. The publishers instead released it to TV, radio, and the newspapers, so it became public domain. And then the government, well, they put them in jail. They put the publishers in jail for a while, but not too long. And then they got them out, and Matusow published the book called False Witness. Well, I got a hold of it, and I saw what the government was doing. So one of the things I could do was pass out copies of the book and have discussions about what the Army had done, you know, and that got me in trouble, of course, but it was the right thing to do.
Was your peer group readily acceptable of that information, or did they have
some were and some weren't.
Right.
And the guys that I traveled with soaked it up. And, you know, I was never a communist, a socialist. I was always very proud of my country and proud to serve my country. You know, it wasn't a joke to me.
Right.
So I wasn't anti the United States. I thought I was doing something for the United States, just like Edward R. Murrow was doing on the radio when exposing McCarthy and saying, this is wrong. The Boy Scouts are not a communist organization. The State Department is not filled with communists. We don't have to elect, you know, certain people. But boy, people were scared, and they were scared of McCarthy. So that's something I could do. It wasn't within the unit that I was in. It was a little outside.
As a service member, you know, one of the things that I think probably service-wide that we like to do is every now and again go out on the weekend and blow off just a little bit of steam. I have a picture here of you from the Latin Casino.
Well, I was stationed near Philadelphia. I mean, it was really pretty soft duty. And what the local citizens would do would take us out. Didn't take the patients out of the hospital, but the corpsmen, the people who were serving. And so we went to the Latin Casino in Philadelphia, and you couldn't buy a drink for yourself. They would buy drinks for you and took care of you, and they'd keep you in the Latin Casino. Of course, we were all interested in going out of the Latin Casino and finding some women. But nevertheless, it was nice to be treated to free drinks and
Certainly.
fancy nightclubs. It was pretty good R&R.
Can you point out
yes.
which?
There I am.
There you are, right in the center of the picture.
And these were two guys that were very close to me, who I could give the book to and pass it on, but I got in trouble for doing that. You know, everything was legal that I was doing, but they thought I was educating people towards communism, which couldn't have been more incorrect.
I'm going to jump back just a little bit. I have another document here that I think is really interesting. Now, this is from your commanding officer while you were in boot camp, and this is a letter to your mother. Is that correct?
That's correct. When we went into the service, when I was inducted into the service and started boot camp, the commanding officer sent out letters to our parents inviting them to come. They could stay near the post and that would be taken care of. In essence, it said, we're going to take care of your dear little boy.
Sure.
That's what it said. Well, it fed my mother because she loved that. I told you a story I can't not say on camera because it was so funny. when I started getting investigated for the Matuso book, and I had a sister who was a little active in politics, they started investigating me while I was in the Army as a possible communist. And so they began not only interviewing the guys around me, but they went to my hometown in Pittsburgh. They started interviewing neighbors and teachers and things like that. I mean, there was an investigation to find out just how evil I might be or how much of a threat to the U.S. I might be. And my mother got wind of it, that the neighbors were being interviewed. She called me up on the phone and she said, "Jerry, I think you're up for corporal." They're asking all the, but that's not even my favorite mother story from the Army. My favorite mother story from the Army, I'm a disabled veteran. My disability came because I was playing tennis on post and hurt my knee, so I was put in the hospital. So it became incumbent on me to tell my mother, "I'm in the hospital." She said, "Hold everything, I'm sending Dr. Lebo."
Who's Dr. Lebo?
My pediatrician. But I had enough of a sense of humor then. I said, "Yeah, send him, Mom." I wanted to see my pediatrician come into that Army place and say, "I want to see little Jerry Alpern." Parents are wonderful.
They truly are, truly are. And an intricate part of what I think is many of our homecomings is having that family or there, having family or some kind of support network to come home to. So you did a few years in the Army. Let's jump forward just a little bit to that. You're starting to wind down your time in the service. You're starting to look at a transition out. You had gone into the service with plans of going to graduate school. So tell me, the preceding weeks, you're getting out of the military. Tell me about the first few weeks and months that you're out.
Adam, I respect you beyond belief for what you're doing with the Purple Star Foundation, and I know your passion is to make that transition make some sense. I support you in any way I can.
Thank you.
But what you're doing is you're dealing with veterans who are coming back from horrific wars with all kinds of psychological and physiological wounds and that kind of thing. You really can't compare. I was working at a hospital. I had a lot of time off. I went to nightclubs and drinks were bought for me. I had camaraderie. I saw no one wounded except the wounding that we were doing. I saw no one killed. I didn't turn into another person. I was still studying my psychology. I had a plan that the government was going to help me pay for my graduate school. So what I went through was just having a few, I don't know, maybe a month before I went to graduate school, and I was reading books and I was in the bosom of my family, and I did not suffer for being in the service. That has nothing to do with what you're doing. And through my reading and knowing you, I'm committed to helping you in any way I can, using any skills I may have to be able to help you, because you're doing a wonderful thing. But my transition was a piece of cake.
Dr. Alpern, thank you for saying that. And,
well, it's true.
I will continue to rely on you for support and guidance in that.
I mean, that's what I think I can do. I did not render the kind of service that so many have rendered. What I can do, and I'd like to get to this point where I'd like to talk to our audience about what they can do, because you cannot depend on the Army to take care of people that are in combat, that are in service, and damn it, you cannot trust the VA to be able to help them when they come out of the service. They're overwhelmed, they have too many cases, and they have philosophies. I'm into reading the policies. What does the VA do for these people? Because now that I've educated myself as what post-traumatic stress disorder is, I also educate myself about what is correct treatment for it. The same is true for even more people who are brain injured. That's a more complicated, not less incapacitating,
Right.
but a different thing, and it takes a different kind of treatment. And I'm in touch with people, so I know what the Army does, I know what the VA is trying to do, and I know what needs to be done. So I didn't give a lot back in those years. I'm going to give it now.
It's interesting. We're talking about some of the invisible wounds of war, both with post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury. You know, physically, many appear to be okay, but the repeated concussions of IEDs and RPGs and the explosions knocking guys down time and time and time again, leading to traumatic brain injury of varying degrees. And with post-traumatic stress disorder, you know, at a young age, going overseas into combat and seeing, you know, just, you know, horrible, ugly things for much of your young adult life, and coming right back out and expecting to go back to your community without really addressing some of those issues. So I guess I want to start here, because I do want to get into some of this. Let's start here. Your experience going from college, going to the military, and then you got out and you used the GI Bill to go to graduate school. Is that correct?
Yes, partially. And I had a stipend every month. I got a check for $100 and something. I was one of the richest graduate students in my class. Yeah, it was very good. I was taken care of. And then when I later had children, I was living in certain states because I was a disabled veteran.
Right.
I can hardly say that with a straight face. You know, I had benefits. I could have sent my kids to college free had I stayed in Indiana. That's where I was. After I got my degree, I was at Indiana University Medical School, where I was a professor. And as a disabled vet, my kids could have gotten their tuition paid for school.
Right.
But I moved to Colorado for wonderful reasons, which I've never regretted.
Yeah, it's interesting, you know, being a disabled veteran, you know, it all depends on state in a lot of that. I know in some states, if you have a Purple Heart, you can go to school for free, your kids can go to school for free. In other states, having a Purple Heart, you get a free fishing license. So, you know, again, varying degrees of care that's provided, you know, depending on your level of disability. So when you came back out of the service, did you stay in school until you achieved your Ph.D.?
Oh yes, I stayed in school and got my Ph.D. and then went immediately to Indiana University Medical School, where I went up the ladder and became a full professor, taught
Wow.
psychiatrists, social workers, and began practicing good psychology. And then eventually I came here in about 75, started a private practice, and I've had an active clinical practice. I had it for 35 years here.
Wow.
Now I'm semi-retired. And I mean, the joys of being semi-retired is because I can give myself to these organizations. I'm kind of like making up for the smooth ride that I had, and knowing that I could have given more and done more. You can't change the past, but you have right now. And you know, another thing I want to bring up, the Korean vets that came back that were chewed up, prisoners of war, all the horrors of war. It wasn't like the Second World War veterans that came back with parades and waving things. They were not heroes. They were thought of, first of all, they thought they lost the war, right, which is not really true. If I know the history of Korea, we stopped them at the 38th parallel. Right. Communist China wanted to dominate the whole thing. Yep. Korea had been one unit when the Japanese had it before the war. After the war, the Soviets took over the north and the U.S. took over the south. Eventually, the communist Chinese took over the north. They not only did that, they invaded the south. So they invaded the south and wanted to take over all of Korea. And we didn't lose that war. We held them at the 38th parallel. We now have an ally in South Korea, thank God, you know. And so but that wasn't the public perception. The public perception is that these people committed horrible crimes. They weren't really soldiers. They didn't win the war, and they were disrespected that came back. And that's another one of my things, is to remember that those Korean vets, I mean, I have some numbers. I don't know that it was called the Forgotten War. Harry Truman called it a police action, didn't even want to call it a war. Iraq, we lost about 4,500 soldiers, killed. Afghanistan, maybe 2,100 or so. Korea, 37,600. And that's just the amount of people who were killed, those prisoners of war that were tormented. It was a horrendous war, and those guys deserve much better than they got back. I'm kind of pleased to see the populace these days understanding a little more, because of guys like you and Paul Anderson and the Colonel Merritt is really teaching the populace, and I think we're getting a response. We're just at the beginning, but I think people are honoring vets and see these are volunteers. You know, half of the guys in, like, say, Korea and in the Second World War, they were conscripted, they were drafted.
Right.
These post 9/11 vets, they volunteered for that.
Right.
And they had a mission and a soul that they were giving to their country. We owe them a lot.
Thank you for saying that,
Well,
Doctor.
not hard to say.
So, in keeping with the Korean War, you know, over a half century later, here we are. And you turn on the news, you pick up the newspaper, social media, you know, we're still talking about North Korea, we're still talking about South Korea, the 38th parallel. You know, how does that make you feel all these years later that we're, you know?
Well, you know, it's like I said, people think that, you know, it's still going on, we're screwed up. We don't have that maniac from North Korea running that entire peninsula.
Right.
We have, you know, people, the female president of South Korea is a good woman, and she's our ally. We have a whole thing. We did okay. We did, the communist China, well, Russia had so much more firepower
Right.
than we had after the Second World War. They were the much more powerful country in every way, shape, and form. If you units, battalions, equipment,
Air support,
they ended up,
absolutely.
you know, the fact that we held them, that we didn't lose that. So the fact that it's still there, I focus on the fact we have South Korea. We have an ally. We have a democracy there that's helping,
Right.
and in so many ways. So, you know, I don't have bad feelings about that. I know that the goal was to run the communist completely out of Korea. You know, MacArthur, who got in trouble with Truman, you know, for one, he wanted to go into communist China and blast them from that point, but we didn't have the ability to do that. It would have been a hot war. And so I back what Truman had done and had to fire McCarthy and the guy who was a real hero during the Second World War. I mean, our enemies become our friends become our enemies. Somebody who is a great general in one war, you know, doesn't serve in another war. And another thing I want to take this opportunity to say, citizens have a role to play. The end of the Vietnam War, it wasn't the hippies, it was the anti-war people. I mean, hippies were part of it. But left to the government, I don't know when Vietnam would have ended. It ended in '73, and it ended because the public rose up and said, no, 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 this war is not a good war. It is not the Second World War. And they ended it. It's the same way now. We have to know the power of citizens. As I told you, I was very disappointed with the Occupy Wall Street movement because those people were protesting against some good things, but they didn't have a focus, they didn't have a leader. They went off in a lot of different directions. It became party town. It was kind of like a little imitation of the partying aspects of hippies, you know. Too bad. But what we can do, those of us who feel the way we feel, is to make sure that citizens get active
right.
in some way, supporting some organization. You have petitions that you
right.
want to have signed
That's right.
to change. And you know, you're aiming for what, 1 million petitions?
That's what we feel like it's going to take, because I think you're exactly right. We have elected officials to represent us, to represent our opinions, our beliefs, and when enough of us stand up and unite our voice, when that voice gets loud enough, you know, that's when we believe we're going to see change. And you know, that's our, you know, #1 avenue with Purple Star veterans and families, is if we can unite 1 million people to say, you know, let's set our veterans up for success on homecoming. You know, it's interesting, from Korea and back so much further, since Homer wrote the Iliad, there's been written documentation of, you know, what's happening to veterans when they come home. All these centuries later, all these wars fought later, we still haven't standardized, you know, a program to help reintegrate. You know, you were able to get out and go back to college. You know, today's veterans have that same opportunity with the GI Bill. Only 12% are really able to take advantage of that. There's an 88% failure rate. Veteran suicides are every 65 minutes. Just a host of manifestations with substance abuse and domestic violence and speed-related incidents. And, you know, heaven forbid a conflict come up, you know, 5 years from now, 2 years from now, 2 months from now. You know, we'll see the statistical equivalency to that then as we do now, as it seems to be a human response to war itself. You know, we talked a little bit about how Korean War veterans were treated when they were come home, and Vietnam veterans, and we see the complete opposite with this generation's veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan's. But the numbers of manifestations of PTSD are the same. Regardless of the overall opinion, you know, folks are still coming back and struggling. And until enough of us stand up and say, enough is enough, we need to standardize a program. You know, we need to set these guys up for success by, you know, what we believe is, you know, 90-day program before they leave, giving them the tools and techniques they need to be well.
I loved it when you described it to me as, when you go in the Army, you get basic training that turns you into a soldier from a civilian. And your idea is to take a soldier and don't let him go. I mean, maybe he can go home and say hello to mother and wife and baby, but he should have an equal program that really sets him in the right direction, so that he can become an effective civilian and not be a wife beater or an alcoholic or what have you.
That's right. I mean, it just makes sense rationally. You know, if your job is to, you know, fight a war, kick in doors, shoot bad guys, but then you get a new job to go to college or to go home and be a husband or a wife or a mother or a father, there needs to be a level of training to set you up for that job. And that's not being done, and it will when enough of us unite our voice.
I'm so for that. And you know, a corollary to that, which gets into my field, is, and I alluded to this, proper treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder, proper treatment for brain injury, because let's just take the veterans organizations, because we're talking about vets. I'm in touch with doctors, medical doctors, and they say, they have taught me, and I've seen documentation, that you go to the VA, it's not that the VA doesn't know what to do, because I've been in touch with them too, and they speak a good game, but there is pressure for them to treat people as cheaply as possible. If you give somebody pills, that costs pennies. Even if you treat correctly for post-traumatic stress disorders, it's 8-12 weeks of treatment. Doable, but more expensive than giving a pill. Treat somebody for traumatic brain injury, and you're talking about months, maybe a year and a half. The treatments exist. We can help these people.
That's right.
But we have to, for instance, I talked to this doctor I'm in touch with this, Dr. Gordon. She runs a private organization to treat. I mean, she's put together, like you put together an organization. Her organization is Resurrect Lives, and she's personally using her own money to put together things. And when I ask her, well, with the brain injured people, what vet program or what you could write, she said, do not send them to the veterans programs. Every state has an organization for brain injury. The veterans are more likely to get appropriate treatment from the state organizations than from the VA. Those are the kind of things that we have to do. In my field, where we deal one-on-one with post-traumatic stress disorders, if you'd have asked me to, and I treated a lot of vets from Vietnam and that kind of thing, and you know, I was using old techniques, kind of like the Army. I believed in what I was doing. When I started getting involved in this work in these organizations, you know, I took it upon myself to do a little research. There are techniques, proven techniques for dealing with post-traumatic stress disorders that I didn't know about. So any vet who goes to anyone within the veteran system or outside the veteran system, there's some questions that they ought to ask of the person that's treating them. You can't go by, oh, he's got a Ph.D. or an M.D. You can't go by credentials. What you go by is you say, tell me what your training is. What is the treatment going to be? You know, is it going to be prolonged exposure, cognitive behavioral therapy? The ones that we know empirically work, that's who you work with. You meet somebody like me a few years ago, a nice guy, really trying to help, but not up to date on what I was doing, you know? And I failed with a lot of Vietnam vets. So tight, you know, so impossible to open up. And they wouldn't open up. And I was then helpless. And so my ability to help these guys was limited. Helped, you know, I think in the long run, I'll give myself a C+.
Sure.
I could get an A now because I've learned. So you have to check when you're working with somebody, do they, and I think within your organization, you and I will develop a set of criteria that we can hand to these people. If you're suffering, this is what you ought to get, this is what you ought to stay away from. And don't take pills. Your own story about taking pills and being treated and somebody to tell you to double your medication. Why don't you tell that story?
You know, when I first came back and I had a really difficult and harmful transition from combat to college, combat to community, and you know, I, like a lot of vets, did not go seek help until consequences piled up enough. And that's one of the issues I do want to talk about is, you know, the difference in preventative maintenance, you know, financially and consequentially. You know, if we give these guys tools before they come out and, you know, end up in trouble with the law, ruined relationships, you know, violent with children, if we give them the tools, maybe we can prevent that. You know, when things had gotten bad enough for me that I finally went and said, okay, I need some help, you know, that the immediate response was, you know, here's Seroquel. And I'm sure you're familiar with Seroquel. I mean, it will just, it'll make you go to sleep all day. And that seemed to be the answer for me at that time. And, you know, we have to be our #1 advocates.
It didn't seem to be the answer. Really the answer, it seemed to be what they
told
you that
exactly.
Was the answer.
We have to be our #1 advocates when it comes to medication and not just take blindly, you know, take it and then ask questions later. We need to be asking questions up front and looking at short, long-term side effects, and because there's other treatment modalities out there besides just medication, although I think there's a time and place for it, you know, if we're unstable, but you know, some of these other modalities of, you know, cognitive behavioral therapy and exposure, prolonged exposure, you know, some of these things have some real evidence-based research that show they're working. Is that correct?
Oh, it's undoubtedly correct. I mean, That's what we do now, evidence-based medicine. And you have to be able to prove it. That's what this doctor is doing with brain injury. She's out to prove with her own money, that you can treat brain injured people months and months and months after the injury. They used to think that if you don't get brain injured, parts of the brain die, can't function, other parts can't take over, and she's out to prove there are treatments that work, and she's demonstrating that scientifically and putting it in the literature. That's the idea. And what she says goes on, and well, it's an interesting thing. This is a little bit of a side story. Another project I'm into is she got me in touch with a playwright who wrote about returning guys from Afghanistan. It's kind of like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. They're put in a hospital, brain injured, post-traumatic stress disorder, and the play revolves around the treatment that these guys are getting. It's a very wonderful play, and we're going to try to get it produced here to educate the public as to what's going on, because there'll be a good medical officer there who wants to treat the patients that come into the hospital appropriately, and then there's the officer above that person who says you can't diagnose them correctly.
Right.
You have to diagnose them so we can give them this cheaper treatment.
Right.
Now, we can say that, but a dramatic, moving presentation. I'm trying to get the Aspen Institute to put on that play, at least as a reading, and I'm working with a theater group here. We have to educate the public.
That's right.
Your job, you want to educate for the homecoming so that there's a basic training to get out and become a civilian.
Right.
That's important. We have to take a multi-approach.
Yep.
Get it into the theaters, get it into the public mind of what's going on that's wrong, but that there are solutions to these problems. And again, that's what was wrong with the Wall Street movement, the Occupy movement. They complained about a lot of things. They didn't know what direction to go in. They were shotgunning it all over.
Right.
The program that you have, of course we ought to be taking these people and preparing them for civilian life.
Right.
We could do away with a lot of tragedies, but I want to educate the public to that too.
Right.
I want the public to be behind it. It's easy to sign a petition, but I want them to get some skin in the game. I want them to volunteer to do some kind of things. Give money, give time, whatever resources they have, but know what these guys are going through, and whether they donate money or time or something, they need to realize what they went through. Mine was not that the Korean veterans was a piece of cake, because it was horrific.
Right.
My particular experience was I had a good. It was not traumatic for me. I mean, I didn't like to see people beat up, and I fought against that.
Right.
But it is not like having an explosion 8, 10, 12 times.
Right.
It's not like I'd seen such horrific things that I couldn't think about them. All these treatments, incidentally, for post-traumatic stress disorder, based on a pretty simple concept. If somebody dies in your family, you'll see the people who grieve, who weep and wail, they get over it.
Right.
It's the people that bottle it up, keep it up, and don't grieve that suffer for so long with that. Well, multiply that by about 10,000 times for the trauma of seeing buddies blown up and doing terrible things that you regret doing, not understanding who you are, what the human life is, and that plagues you, and you don't want to think about it, and you don't want to remember it, and you sure don't want to have the emotions at it. And that's exactly the wrong thing to do. It's like bottling up grief. So all these techniques, eye movement, desensitization, the techniques that we use, they're not pleasant techniques to go through, but 8 weeks and you're over the majority of it. So you have to convince it. We have to do a selling job, from my end of the business. We have to do a selling job. Yes, this is not going to be pleasant. I'm going to make you remember that, talk about it. We're going to put it on a tape recorder. You're going to listen to it. You're going to tell this story to people. You're going to confront situations that are frightening to you. I mean, we do it slowly, and it's not a forced march. That's what you have to learn how to do it, how to do these treatments, again, in a humane way, but it takes guts on the part of the person who does them, because they're not fun treatments, but they're better than being strapped onto a bed and being pumped full of insulin and being killed every morning. You know, I want to say one other thing about the government. Again, the point that, you know, we can't depend on the government to do things. There was a CIA program. I got a note on it, so I'm going to give you if I can find, this program was called MK Ultra. You know that program? Have you ever heard of it?
I may have, but I'm not familiar.
CIA ran it, and it was an illegal program, and it was illegal, went till 1973. They were trying to find out about mind-altering drugs.
This is when they used LSD?
Yeah, they gave LSD, they gave one poor guy LSD 154 days in a row. You don't do acid 154. The Unabomber was in that program. But what the CIA did is secretly they would take prisoners or prostitutes or people in mental hospitals or citizens of the United States or in Canada. They did it in both places. And they gave these people wild drugs with the people had no idea what they were taking. Drove some people, of course, completely bats. And eventually the Congress got around to stopping them in '73. They started in 1950. Sexual abuse was part of their program to see what that would do to people. The guy who was running it was a Dr. Cameron, who was the president of the American and Canadian Psychiatric Association. And he was the guy who was running this program. You just, it's an old story, you have to watch what the government does if they let you see. So I just...
You know, I love the term that you had said, skin in the game, and what we as community members can do. You know, there's local nonprofits that we can volunteer or donate or visit the websites to learn more. And we have to be advocates, and we have to be responsible for arming ourselves with knowledge. And, you know, and we've learned a lot from, you know, the way we were treating PTSD in the 1950s to how we're doing it now. Was there, you know, what we're calling post-traumatic stress disorder, I know has gone by a number of different names. The ancient historian Herodotus described it as being out of heart and soldier's heart and irritable heart. Was there a common referred nickname to it in the Korean War?
You know, they didn't even give it a diagnosis. They didn't recognize it. When Patton slapped that soldier in the tent, if anybody saw the Patton movie, you know, it's a very famous story. He went in to take care of the wounded, brave men, and those men he honored and he saluted. And he came to one guy who had no injuries at all, but was clearly psychologically suffering from some form of what we now call, and he slapped him. You know, you're a coward, get out of here, you don't deserve to be in with those wounded men.
A lot of stereotype that comes with these invisible wounds.
Yes, and you know, so, you know, you're asking for names like, oh, he was gassed, or he was this, or, you know, I heard old sergeant's fatigue.
Right.
You know, give it up-itis. Those were the cute little names for the people who were psychologically wounded.
Suffering.
But you have so many statistics on these guys that come back. They're not bleeding. They have all their limbs, but they're drunks. They can't hold a job. They can't be in a relationship with women. And they're killing themselves eventually. What's that figure on how many are killing themselves?
Every 65 minutes.
Every 65 minutes.
Every 65 minutes. We lose
so
a veteran to suicide.
So we lose more to suicide than we lose in battle?
Oh, outrageously. Outrageously. Statistically, homecoming is more dangerous than combat. And we spend all our time, money, and energy in prep.
Statistically, say it again. I want to hear it.
Homecoming is more dangerous than combat. You know, guys that come back from the war, we're losing more loss of life here on our home soil than we actually are on foreign soil in combat.
I mean, the public has to know that. I mean, that's such a powerful statement, and we have to get that word out. And so I don't know whether this particular little TV thing will ever get out or who it gets out to. But I think we all have to devote ourselves to learning about it. You know, I mean, I read books until I just cried and I couldn't read anymore. You can find out what's going on, and then you find out what you can do.
That's right.
And
speaking of some of that, Huts for Vets, you and I are sit on the board. Colonel Merritt, Lieutenant Colonel Oates, a list of highly accomplished people, and a wonderful program here in the Valley. I want to encourage folks to visit hutsforvets.org. Purple Star Veterans and Families. Please visit our website at purplestarfamilies.org. People need to get some skin in the game, because we can't continue to rely on the VA or other people or our politicians from up high to issue policies that are going to create change. It seems to me that change is going to happen from the bottom up. This is a grassroots movement.
And it's a wonderful thing to do. You can do something. You know, there's so many things that are happening in government and happen that we have very little control over, very little control over. But like we ended the Vietnam War with citizens who were active, we can help these veterans. We know how to do it. We can get the money to do it. We can volunteer to do it. And it's not painful. I mean, for me, I'm going to go up with those Huts with Vets. I'm going to be the resident shrink, not to treat the people, but if something emotional comes up, I can do a little first aid and I can send them in the right direction. But for me, that's fun. I want to meet the guys who were really there. I want to hear them talk, because then I'll be better to give them something back. So for me, it's hiking in the woods. I think I'm taking an easy track out like I took when I was in the service. What I'm going to be doing is hiking in the beautiful mountains of Colorado with these guys, but I'll be devoted to learning about them.
Doc, I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, but your age, you're 80 years old, and you're going to go hiking in the woods in support of these veterans in case someone emotionally gets triggered, or there may need to be some first aid responded. What is it that you do to keep so happy and healthy and young, really?
Well, I'll tell you, being in these organizations is very helpful. You have to have something that you believe in. You have to be learning new things. Yes, you have to do exercise and you have to eat well, and everybody knows that. But when you start devoting yourself to things that get to your heart, when you start learning things you didn't know before, that's what produces youth. Passion is what we think of as being youth. You want to be passionate as an 80-year-old, so get involved. That's my message about how to do it.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. Doc, I know we're probably running low on time, and I have two more questions for you. One, what is it that you've learned? Do you want to recap and tell us some of the most valuable lessons that you've learned, and your experience in the military, how it shaped your perspective, belief to what you're doing now?
Well, I've always been a little anti-authoritarian, so that's why I wasn't a great fit in the service. But on the opposite end of that, there are good people out there. There are people who are like this Dr. Gordon, who I described to you, who's working to deal with me. So what I've learned is you pick the authorities. You just don't say, oh, it's all terrible and might as well give up, and don't act. What I've learned is you find the right authorities, the people who are doing the good work, and you join with them. You know, you're not just a rebel, and you're just not saying, well, the world is just terrible. You find the right people, something that makes sense to you, and you follow it, and you work for it, and you'll be a happier, more fulfilled person. I think that's one of the things that I've learned. The other one was, you know, we're raised in a society where all the people in government are good people, and the police are all good people, and that kind of thing. So then you grow out of that and you say, wait a minute, they're not all good people, but you don't put them all down. It's kind of like the same message. You have a responsibility to find out, instead of taking an attitude that all cops are crooks, basically, and you can't ever. I've seen policemen, and we've all seen policemen recently in the Boston thing, that make all kinds of sacrifices. I've seen even politicians run into burning buildings. So I guess my learnings are, I guess there was one time in my life when I was just a rebel, you know, thumbs down to everything. And I guess, I don't know about lessons, but I'll say my lesson is to find the good guys, which takes some work and some thinking. Thinking is hard to do. You find people that you like and you give them your all.
That's beautiful. Doc, thank you. I'd also like to present you with two things. One, I just can't appreciate you coming on the show today and sharing with us your experience.
Thanks for the chance to do it. It's another way to give.
I would like to present you with an honorary Purple Star flag in your support.
Why is it honorary? What makes it who is it for, really?
Really, in keeping like with Blue Star and Gold Star mothers, it shows awareness, it shows support.
Oh, it's showing support.
Well,
how do I have to go from honorary to a real?
Because that's the only official flag we got. So.
No, I want to support it, so that's what I'm
Please
saying.
hang that in your window, and again, I'll continue to rely on you for support and guidance.
Thank you.
And questions in
earn
regards to this. And I also want to present you with the Roaring Fork Veterans History Project pin. Doc, it's been a real pleasure today, and I've really enjoyed our conversation.
And we're going to have more.
Yes, sir. I'm going to give you the opportunity. Is there anything else that you would like to add here today?
You know, I think I've said what I need to say. I had notes to bring up all kinds of little details. The details aren't important. I think you delivered the message. I helped very well to the people. If they want to follow through, they go to www.purplestarfamilies.org. They go to hutsforvets.org. Let them learn, and if they do that, we've been starting a successful thing.
Dr. Jerry Alpern, thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
In closing today, I'd like to thank the Roaring Fork Veterans History Project. They exist to capture the personal stories of veterans of all wars, especially those veterans whose stories may soon be lost. To support this important community project, please contact Colonel Dick Merritt, United States Marine Corps. You can call him at 970-927-5178. Again, that number is 970-927-5178. Or you can email him at merritt@q.com. Again, MERRITT@q.com. Thank you very much.